In this video, I'm going to talk about the liability of childbirth. That is, what are the risks that you invoke when you decide to have a baby? These are risks to you personally and risks to others. It turns out every activity has risks, and having a baby is one of the riskiest activities you can ever engage in. Now, in previous videos, I talked about the population implosion. The fact that in most of the developed world and all the highest strata of society, they're not having enough babies. Babies are still being produced, but they're being produced in the third world, and they're being produced by the less capable members of society. The more educated you are, the more capable you are, likely the fewer babies you're going to have. And this means over time that you're just not reproducing, and the values that you hold dear are not going to be perpetuated into the next generation. So I'm deeply conflicted about this. I'm wondering, why don't people have babies, and whether I should have a baby? And weighing things out, the thing that really drags me down is the liability, is the risk of having a child. Back in the old days, in most of human history, there was no choice about having children. You just had them. As long as you fell victim to the wiles of romance, as long as you were sexually attracted to someone, then naturally babies would follow, because when there was sex, there was babies. Now, once we have developed birth control, then having a baby becomes a choice, which is entirely different. A choice means you have to think things through, and you have to decide which way to go. And more importantly, when you have a choice, you also incur liability. Something becomes your responsibility. And the very simplest, the simplest concept here is a legal concept and a moral concept, that when you engage in a risky behavior and you do it willingly, then you are responsible for all the results of your actions. So if you choose to drink and drive, or you choose to drive too fast, and by taking that risky behavior, you kill someone, you are responsible for that death, and you're going to go to jail for it. And that's true with childbirth. If you choose to have a child, a man and a woman choose to have a child and bring their gametes together, you don't know what you're going to get. You know there's a huge risk involved. Yes, your child could turn out to be brilliant. Your child could be the next Einstein or someone who changes the world. But in our system of reproduction, it's far more likely there's something that's going to go wrong with that child. There are so many different kinds of birth defects, each of which has a statistically significant risk of happening, like severe autism. That's not your fault. But by choosing to have a child, and if that child has severe autism and can't work, can't ever become a productive member of society, you are responsible for that person for as long as they live. That is your burden, your obligation. What it comes down to is that by having a child, you have imposed on yourself an unlimited liability. There is no limit to how much this could cost you if things go bad. Having this child could cost you everything that you own, everything that you hold dear if things go bad. Because if this child is in trouble, you will give up everything to try to save them. There's really no other activity that humans engage in that is so risky and involves such a potentially enormous cost. And I'm not just worried about my own well-being, but about the well-being of my hypothetical child. I'm placing risks on that child by having them to begin with. Imagine that I choose to have a child, and that child has a serious physical ailment which causes them enormous pain. Imagine that child eventually gets cancer and has that pain. Well, that pain never had to happen if I hadn't made the child to begin with. So not only am I responsible, but I created a painful universe that didn't have to happen. Now, children aren't usually like that. Children are usually a joy, and it's fun to watch them grow up. It's fun to raise them. Just like a pet, it's fun to have them. But there's a substantial risk that by having them, you impose hell on them, that you impose a great deal of pain on them that never had to happen in the universe had you not taken that step. You have the liability of the actual birth process, where you don't know what you're going to get. You're mixing up the genes of mother and father in a big test tube, and you're seeing what happens. It's a kind of a Frankenstein experiment, where you take genes from one person and genes from another one, mix them all together, and what do you get? Well, you could get something brilliant, but you could get a Frankenstein. It's just this experiment. It's a big spinning of a roulette wheel to see what happens. So you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what's going to come out of the womb when you make this big decision. And it's like there could be a significant 5 or 10% risk that this child isn't healthy coming out of the womb, that there's something seriously congenitally wrong. And who would ever take that risk? You would not engage in a dangerous sport that had a 10% risk of killing you or maiming you. That risk is too high. Yet people routinely take those risks when they have a baby. There's a huge risk. It's impossible to quantify exactly, but there's a huge risk that something is going to go wrong before that child is even born. Then, when the child is born, you are responsible for them until they reach the age of maturity, which could be anywhere between 18 and 20 and 30, depending on how you measure it. And anything they do, anything that goes wrong, is still your responsibility. If you have a teenager who gets involved in a swimming accident and breaks his neck and can no longer take care of himself, you're responsible for that child for the rest of your life, simply because of the fact that you brought him into the world. And kids hit the teenage years, and what happens when the kids hit the teenage years? You have no control over them. You tried your best to raise them through the younger childhood years, but once they hit teenagers, they start doing crazy things. They start doing things that get them arrested. And no matter how good you are at raising that child, you've lost control. You begin to lose control in those teenage years, but still you're responsible. You're the parent. You're the one who has to go bail them out of jail. So if you add up all of these risks, the risk of childbirth, the risk of accidents during childhood, the risk of the child going off in a dangerous direction, all of that is an enormous risk with virtually no reward for you. The only reward you're getting out of it is that you know that something of you is going to be transferred to the next generation, which is kind of a vague goal. It's not a clear-cut goal. So you're willing to take this huge risk of raising a child, of having a child and raising a child, with the kind of vague hope that they'll carry on after you. That's not a very powerful reward. So the more you think about it, the more you figure, well, is this a good idea for me? Is this a good investment for my resources? Is this a good risk to take? The more you think, the more you add things up, you have to say no. You have to say that the children just aren't worth it. So that's the mindset that the intelligent world is working from. And if we want to save our civilization, we've got to address that in some way. Address first of all, the liability issues. What if something goes wrong with my child? What is my liability going to be? If my child comes out of the womb with a severe handicap that prevents him from ever standing on his own, who's going to take care of that child? And certain countries are better at that than others. If this happens in Norway, where there's a good safety net, you have a pretty good, your liability is limited. In other words, if you do have this child that can't function that the state will step in and help out and limit your liability. You really don't have that in America. You don't have that kind of safety net, and so in America, you just don't want to do it. So if we're going to save our civilization, if we're going to save humanity and keep humanity moving on to the next generation, there has to be some mechanism that steps in and distributes liability. And that's what insurance is for example. If you drive a car, which is a risky undertaking, you buy car insurance, which covers most of the things that could go wrong in driving a car, hitting a pedestrian, or doing damage to property, or doing damage to the car, or hurting yourself. All these are covered by car insurance. And what we need is some kind of parent insurance, a pooling of liability, because the risks are too great for any thinking individual to take, but they are not too great for a group to take responsibility for. For example, if you have 10,000 people, if 10,000 parents having children, there's only a limited number of those children that are going to have physical defects. And if we pool all of the resources of these parents, then the pool should be able to take care of any problems that happen in the birthing process and in the raising of children. And some societies do that pretty well. That has to work better, and it has to be convincing enough to parents that they are willing to take this risk of bringing a new life into the world. Personally, I'm terrified. Terrified of the cost of parenthood, because it would totally change my life. It would totally disrupt everything I've built of my life and force me to be a different kind of person than I am now. And I'm terrified of the liability, the risks of bringing a new life into the world that didn't have to happen if I hadn't made that choice. So choice can be a terrible thing. Back in the old days, there was no choice. Everyone had children. Rich or poor, smart or foolish, everybody had children. If you succumbed to sexual attraction, then you had children. And today, when you have a choice, the burdens are so much greater because of that choice, because you know that anything that happens after conception is your fault because you made the decision.